For this session, you're going to need several files we've worked on already in the past. We're going to need the Photoshop layout that you sliced up already and saved for web. You're also going to need the HTML and CSS file that we created a couple of sessions ago, where I called it the new HTML skeleton, where you've basically got a container, a header, a nav, and 3 columns. Now the HTML is actually not going to change, at least here at first. We're going to leave the HTML the same, and then we're going to jump over to the CSS file and we're going to change some of the numbers around here. If we look at that Photoshop layout, it really has the same structure as the first demo. We have a header up here, we have a nav here, and we have 3 columns. So the widths will be a little bit different, maybe some other things too, but essentially we're going to use that same structure, and we're simply going to drop in these images side by side into each one of those divs. When we get down here to the bottom, we'll have to do something different so we can put text and content on top of these areas. But we're going to use that same exact structure as before. So we'll be bouncing back and forth between our CSS file and Photoshop at first, and then we'll jump into the HTML to add these images second. The first thing I want to do is kind of start at the top of the CSS file and make sure our numbers are correct. Our container overall is going to be 955 wide. There's a background color there. You can take that out if you want. I'm actually going to leave it for now. I'll take it out at the very end. I just like to be able to see what I'm working on. Margin of auto centers it. Overflow of hidden reveals the background. So on container, I'm not going to change anything at all. Header, however, will change. I have a width of 955, which is correct, but the height of 100 probably isn't going to stick around. When I go back to Photoshop, I know my header is essentially this black graphic here, this row that goes all the way across. It's all in black. If you take your Slice Select tool, you have to click and hold down on your Slice tool to activate that. The Slice Select tool is a tool we can use to highlight each slice individually. We can also adjust the widths, the heights, and sizes overall if we need to. But right now, the most important thing is that it gives us the capability to double-click on any of our slices, and it gives us our width and height. Now, if this is a solid row going all the way across, the height should be the same on both of these. So I can look at this and see my height is 52. That's the height that I really want my header nav to have. I want it to be 52 pixels high. It's going to be different with every situation. You're probably never going to have the same numbers twice in here, but from this one it's going to be 52. I'm going to go ahead and take out font size. I don't plan to have any text up in the header for right now, so I'm just going to leave it at that. Now I can move on to my nav. The width is 955, that looks correct. My background color I'm going to get rid of, but again I understand that the height of 40 that I plugged in there before is probably not going to be the case this time. So I'll go back to Photoshop, I grab my Slice Select tool, and I should double click any of these slices that you've got here in this navigation row. Any of them are fine. My height is 55. So I can go back to my code view to CSS and I could type in 55. On columns 1, 2, and 3, they should all be about the same as well. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of those comments I put in there before. I'll get rid of the background colors as well. And I'm really just concerned about the widths, and I'll go ahead and leave the padding in. I have an understanding that I will need a pad of some sort in there for my text and my content. So my first column's width is 222. 222. When I go back to my code, I want to put 222 there, but I also have to remember I've got that 40 pixel pad. I've got 20 on the left and 20 on the right. So I would have to do the math here. 222 minus 40 equals 182. And you're certainly welcome to get out a calculator if you need that. I certainly might before the end of this lesson. My middle column, if I go back to Photoshop, is 577. 577. So I'll go back to my CSS And again, 577 is what I'll just kind of type in here to start me out. Again, I've got 20 pixels on the right, 20 pixels on the left for the pad, so that's 40 that I need to take off. And that brings us down to 537. I've got one more column to go, and again I'll jump back to Photoshop with my Slice Select tool. I can see the width on that is 156, and I'll put that width in at 156. If I take 40 off of that, it should give me 116. Now I'll save that, and I can go ahead and look at that in my web browser. And it looks quite different at this point. All of my background colors have been stripped away except for the one on the container, which is normal. It looks like the numbers are about right. If I kind of compare back to Photoshop real quick, it looks like that layout's about the same. So that at least gets my CSS correct. Now I'm ready to start plugging in images. We're going to plug images in two different ways with this lesson. We're going to do foreground images, or just the regular image tag up here in the header. And we'll also do some background images down on these three columns. So let's jump over to our code. Let's actually go to our HTML file. And just inside the header, last time we put header info goes here. Now ultimately that's going to get stripped out of there, and if you want to drop down a line or two so that we can put our graphics and our image tags, you can do that. It's very common to see all of your image tags on one line. We can do them separately the first time around here, and then from that point on I'll probably backspace those and put them all on one line. But I can see from my Photoshop I've got two slices, slice 1 and slice 2. We're going to drop those in like so with the image tag that you've learned before. Image source equals images slash, and I need to know what the name of my files were, so I'll drop back to my root folder, and I see that I had an images folder, and inside the images folder these were called layout _0 and then the slice number .jpg. So I should be able to put layout _01 .jpg. And I'm going to have two of those images. Slice 1 and slice 2. Now if I save that and look at these back in my browser, my header should look better immediately. So it does import those images. I can see the slice 1 and slice 2 in here now, but it doesn't look quite right. Looks like this second one here is not lining up where it's supposed to be. There's a couple things we can do to change this. Like I said a few moments ago, if you put all of your image tags on one line with no spaces between it, a lot of times that'll fix the issue in some browsers. And it does here in Chrome. I'm on a Mac at the moment, and I've got Chrome going. That tends to fix the issue. It really depends on your browser. You know, sometimes your browsers will have a different look depending on the amount of space you have in your code. So while it's okay to have spaces in there sometimes, it's not always a great thing. Now, if you insist on having those spaces, another thing we can do to fix the issue is to put in a CSS rule that will simply float this to the left or right. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a CSS property or CSS rule onto this image. Class equals, and I'm just going to put FL. FL is an abbreviation for float left. And I'll do the same for the other. I'll put a class equals FR for float right. When you've only got two items in a row, it's pretty easy to figure out how they're going to align because you've got one on the left and one on the right. Now I do need to go back and create those CSS rules, so I'll pop over to my CSS file. I'm going to make one called FL, and the only property and value it'll have will be float left, and then I'll make an FR. That will be a float right. And I do these sort of generically so you can reuse these over and over again. As you can imagine, when I get down to my nav in a few minutes and I've got 5 or 6 images there, I can reuse these float lefts and float rights because they're not specific to any one image. That's the beauty of CSS. So even though they're on separate lines now, if I run back to my browser, they're still side by side. I don't really see a change there. So even though I've got each one of these image tags on their own line with a space or additional line break between them, they're still showing up correctly in the browser because of this class. So you've got a couple of choices there. Generally, I'll kind of combine the two. I will go ahead and put a class on there as well as keep them on the same line just to make sure that it's looking good in all browsers. Unfortunately, there's not a great way to test every browser without manually going in and trying it out in each one. So I'll leave that up to you. I'm ready to move on to my navigation div now. Looks like I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slices that are going to be in here. I've got this one here, it's kind of a blank one, just a background element, and then I've got 4 buttons. So going back to my code, I'm going to make life a little easier on myself, and I'm going to copy and paste one of these image tags. Now when I drop down here for this navigation div, if it helps to break it down into several lines, by all means do that. So here's my container, here's my header, opening and closing div, and here's my nav. And I'm going to drop in, what do we have, 5 of those? And I can adjust these as necessary. Slice 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. I'll check Photoshop just to make sure that's true. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That looks correct. Float left I've got on all of these. Now generally, you're going to put a float left on just about everything except for the rightmost object. So even though this is the leftmost and this is the rightmost, those two are kind of easy to figure out. What do you do with these 3 in the middle? Well, they also get float left. The general rule is everything gets a float left in the row except for the rightmost object. So that makes it easy. I've already got these in there. All I have to change is the last one, which will be a float right. That should make these line up perfectly. I'll save that, refresh my browser, and now my navigation div's looking pretty good. Looking much better. Now we can, of course, come in and put links on these at any time. If we decide to go ahead and do that now, we can. If not, we can wait. But essentially it would be an anchor tag, an href before, and the closing A after. Actually, let's go ahead and do it. Even though I don't know what the pages are yet, I can go ahead and create those names. I'm going to go ahead and put a closing A at the end of each one. And you see I'm a big fan of copy and paste here. I know there's going to be a closing anchor after each one of these images. So generally the home page is going to go to index.html, or the home button would go to index.html. The others would just go to whatever the button says. So if this says about, I'll link it to about.html. Services will go to services.html, and contact will go to contacts.html. So I can go ahead and link this. That's to home. This one is to about. This one was services. And this was contact. So I can do a save on that. When I look at this in a browser, visually I shouldn't see a change, with the exception of when I mouse over these. Now my cursor changes from the typical arrow to the hand with the finger sticking out. So it looks like it's pointing at these, signifying that these are now links. If I click them, I shouldn't have any success yet. I haven't made these other pages yet. So they're broken links with the exception of the home button. That's okay. We'll create those pages later. Now we have to move on to our 3 columns. And with these 3, we're going to do the images a bit differently because these are not typical images. I need to type on top of these. I need to put content and other pictures and offers and ads on top of these 3 columns. And you know with HTML code you don't really have layers like you do in Photoshop. So since I'm not allowed to really put an image in and then put a layer on top of it, I have to get a little bit creative. The answer isn't real difficult. The answer is simply to set these as background images in our CSS for each div. So for example, on my column 1, I could set slice number 8 here as a background image to that entire div, and it should take care of it. I'll set slice 9 as a background to column 2, and slice 10 as a background to column 3. And I don't believe you've seen the code yet for what a background image looks like in CSS. It's a little bit lengthy. I'll just add it here to the bottom. It looks like this: background dash image colon URL parenthesis and then the path name. So images slash layout underscore. What number are we on? We are on number 8, 9, and 10. So layout 8.jpg. A lot of websites will tell you need to put a single quote around these or a double quote. You don't have to really do anything. Single quotes are probably better than double, but I don't believe that they're completely necessary. So we'll save one of these and find out for sure. When I refresh this now, I actually see the background image there. Doesn't line up right. I'll have to adjust that padding and margin after the fact, but I wouldn't be able to tell that until I get everything in. So at this point, it looks like that code is working just fine. I'll go back to the background image on only change the B9. In column 3, I'll do the same thing. That'll be 10. I can save that, look at that in my browser. Now I've got a background image on each of my 3 columns. It's not completely right. They're not all the same height yet. Well, that'll be another trick for another lesson, but I also see that my background is not repeating the right way. It looks like it's repeating itself, and maybe I don't really want it to repeat. So that's another issue that we'll fix a little bit later. The last thing I would like to do is fix the padding on this to make sure that I've got it just right. And unfortunately, this is kind of a trial and error process. Now, I'm going to do one column at a time. I'm not going to try to do all 3 of these at once. I can see in my browser that the left pad is really pretty far off. The right pad, it looks right. Same way with the top. So I'm really just interested in increasing my my left pad. Right here is the edge, right along that black there. So this is 20 from here to here. Just kind of eyeballing it. I probably want this to be around 50 or so. But again, it's trial and error. Now I'm going to have to split this up. Right now we've got 20 on left and right. And remember from the previous lesson, we need to split this up into 4 pieces. So it goes top, right, bottom, which I'll just put 5 pixels on there, and left. And I'm going to try 50 and see what that looks like. I'm understanding when I do this, I'm adding to the width overall of this first column, which is going to cause it to get wider, and I'm going to lose my 3rd column down here and so on. So I'm really just focused on this left edge. If that text looks right, then I can go subtract 30 more off of the width overall. I think that 50 is a little much. I don't quite think I need 50. So we'll trial and error this thing till we get it just right. I'm going to try about 45. And that's closer. That looks better to me. So here's a hard math lesson now. We already had 20, and we've had to increase this to 45. So the difference between that is 25 more. You know, we already had 20, now we're adding 25 more, so 45. I've got to take 25 more off of this. If that is just crazy confusing and you can't deal with that math, my advice would be go back to Photoshop, get that original width. The original width was 222. Let's do that. That makes it a little easier. 222, And I'm going to fire up a calculator, and from my calculator I'll subtract 20 and 45. 222 minus 20 minus 45 equals 157 according to my calculator here on my phone that I'm looking at. So I can put 157 in there, save that, and check that in our browser. And much better. My text is fitting just right in there. When I look at the second column, it's pretty close already. If anything, I'd really like to back this up a little bit. I don't quite want 20 all the way from this left. Maybe I'll try 15 instead. So column 2, I'll adjust that padding to 5 on the top, 20 on the right. Does it look good on the right? Yeah, it looks good on the right. We'll do 5 at the bottom, so 5px, and I said 15 from the left. I'll save it, go to my browser with the assumption that this is really going to have some problems. Got that little gap over there. I'm okay with that. And the distance from this left edge is all I'm focused on. That's what I changed from 20 to 15. That looks good to me. It looks about the same as this. So I know that I've got to add 5 more onto the width of this. There's a 5 pixel gap in there now. So whenever you add more to the pad, you subtract from the width. When you take away from the pad, you add to the width. So I need to add 5 more onto this. 537 plus 5 is going to be 542, hopefully. So we can get this squared away there. Looks good. One last one here. I've got to take some pad off of this one. I need more on the right and less on the left. So really going to have to readjust column 3 completely. 5 from the top is alright. We said less, more on the right. We need more pad on the right. So we're going to try maybe 20. Let's try 30. 30 on the right. We'll do 5 on the bottom, and then I need less than 20 on the left. I'm actually going to try 5. Now that's too much math. That's too much math for me at this point to do in my head. So I'm going to go back. My original width was 156. All right, I'm just going to pencil that in here. 156 is where I was at. So I need to do 156 minus 30 minus 5. So minus 30 minus 5 equals 121. Save that, go to my browser, and it's pretty close. I've got a little bit more space over here on the right I'd like to add. So we'll try 5 more here. I'm going to put 35 on the right. We'll take 5 more off of this. I think I can do that in my head. And you see just a lot of trial and error here. And that gets it away from that edge a bit more and feels a bit better. So we've still got some issues with some of the layout. We've got this repeating background. We've got our background down here that kind of stops showing up abruptly when the content ends. That's okay. All this is normal, and we'll fix that at another time. But for right now, that's plenty to throw at you. Bringing your slices in from Photoshop through the code method is not a lot of new code. It's just a matter of tweaking the code that we've got. We've added into our HTML all of our image tags. We went ahead and added some anchor tags to put on the links. We added a CSS class called FL or FR onto each image. And essentially that's it for the HTML. The CSS, we were able to see the new background image property and value. We hadn't seen that before. And we adjusted the padding a little bit more. The padding takes practice. Okay, don't get overwhelmed if that math freaks you out the first few times. It does take practice. So hopefully that helps you get your Photoshop designs into the code. And in the future session, we'll see the same process but with Dreamweaver instead of with code. So I hope that helps.